You are listening to Down Home. I was doing a bit of research on Donald Trump and his campaign against critical race theory back in 2020. Then I stumbled across this.
Getting critical race theory out of our schools is not just a matter of values, it's also a matter of national survival.
Those remarks are from one of his rallies 3 months ago in 2022. CRT continues to be a hot-button topic for right-wing folks in North America. What is critical race theory anyway? It is a graduate-level concept which attempts to explain how historical racism, which is the result of slavery and Jim Crow laws, continues to be ingrained in law and other institutions. In other words, racism is not only the result of individual bigotry, but it's systemic. CRT was an obscure academic concept until Trump's war on equity and diversity training back in 2020. Now it's become the catch-all boogeyman to scare parents into fighting against equity and diversity education. Why is CRT such a hot-button issue? We explore this question in this week's episode. Joining Jay and I is Heather Chandler, my mom, who has an extensive resume working in the area of equity and diversity in Nova Scotia, both on the provincial level in government and in the municipal level in education.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
Welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience from two black men. I'm Derek Wise, and as always, we have Jay Jones.
What's happening?
And this week, a very special guest, we have Heather Chandler, who is my mother. Hey, Mom.
Hello.
We're basically having a roundtable discussion this week about critical race theory, which is quite pertinent, with what's going on in North America the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mom, how do you think we got here? Why is CRT such a talking point?
Well, I'm glad that you start with that question because it's always important to know how we've reached this stage. And these are only my humble personal views. I do believe that we've reached this stage because we have not done the work that we should have been doing since slavery, really. And, you know, I intend to put some information around that because it's often harsh, especially for dominant culture, to hear that. The first reaction to that, a statement like that is, well, you know, look how far we've come. And granted, we have made advances. But when you look at, and I keep saying this to groups and individuals and leaders of organizations, show me who's at the top of your organization, and I'll show you how much work you've been doing in terms of any kind of critical examination. And so when you talk about critical race theory, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a critical race theorist, but I worked in and around justice for the majority of my career as an equity practitioner. And so I have some understanding of what critical race theory means. Critical race theory is all about examining policies, practices, and procedures where it relates to justice, to deconstruct barriers that exist for designated people. In this case, and in most cases, you're talking about Black and brown people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the minute you say we're going to deconstruct your system, there's an automatic, oh, wait now, how is that going to impact me?
Yeah.
I don't think we should do that. We're moving too quickly. And so that is how we're at this stage, because we haven't moved a whole lot, really, in my mind, since the 60s. We've made some huge strides with human rights laws, with various other policies that on the face of them, anti-discrimination policies, have done some good. We have rules and regulations. Whether people follow them or not is another question. But, you know, how substantive are the changes, or have the changes been? I think you'd have to look at, for example, justice, and really examine what has happened since human rights legislation to understand what advancements there have been.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the 60s and the civil rights movement. It's almost like there's been a stall. There's been a lot of theorizing about systemic racism and whatnot, and that a lot of that's actually come out of critical race theory, I believe. But you know, the striking down and the ignoring of CRT, it's almost like you're ignoring what's gone on since the 60s. So it's almost like there's a hard stop point. You know, the civil rights movement, all of a sudden people think that we've moved into that post-racial society concept, you know, even though we all know that's not the case.
Right. And you know, while we're on the term of racism and all the rest of it, I want to add a disclaimer that I am at a personal war with the word race and racism. I believe that our language is so powerful that we know that history has shown us, and it is the case, that race was invented by society. It's a social construct. And that's all very basic and happy to say. When you really come down to it, we're still dividing ourselves from dominant culture in meaningful ways by saying that we are another race. I know that we have to use words to communicate, but I really wish that as a society we would get beyond dividing Black and brown people as something extraordinary or not normal, quote unquote normal, understanding that we are of a different ethnicity. Yes, we are, but we are of the same race. At any rate, that's my
that's a very good point. Like years ago, even before slavery, there was a thing called I hope I'm saying it right, the Bacon's Revolution, or where a lot of the British that came over, they brought servants with them. Some of them were Black, and they even had whites. And then wherever they congregated, the white servants and the Black servants decide to sort of get together to overpower the rulers, and there was an uprising.
Before that uprising, basically there was slavery and whatnot before the Atlantic slave trade.
Yes,
but it was more akin to, in Europe anyway, it was more akin to indentured servitude. So you would basically work your way off, if you could, of the indentured servitude. So when the elites, these British elites, came over to North America, they brought their indentured servitudes with them, both Black and white.
Yeah.
But that uprising that you're talking about, Jay, I don't know if it was conscious or not, but then you had the elite saying, oh my goodness, like there's more of them than us.
Yeah. And that's where they decided to take up power, and they tried to sort of break them down as far as race go, or religion and different things like that. And when that kind of didn't work, they sort of started to break it down into race, and sort of,
Well, the
and then
concept of race came
race
from that.
came
Like,
from that.
yeah,
Yeah.
like skin
Exactly.
color, and then they said,
Yeah.
okay, well,
And then
you
with
know.
the slave trade, it
Yeah.
morphed into slavery. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm,
And so how do you know, I'll go back to the question again. How did we get here? Another simple answer is by ignoring the past.
mm,
So, you know, we made advancements, I believe, in terms of equity up until a certain point. And then we started building in some pretty strong language like affirmative action.
hmm
And that's when the backlash really started. And so, you know, those who are hard right or those who do not believe that there should be equity, if it means they're sharing resources, really dug their heels in, and they're still digging their heels in
yeah.
around equity practices that bring in folks that are not within the dominant culture.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that whenever there's any progress around integration, for example, there is a backlash and a fight, and things stall.
Mm,
People are fearful of speaking out against discrimination, and they still are fearful of that.
hmm
So, you know, if you ask how we got here, it's through lack of, I wouldn't call it motivation. I think people are motivated to change, but I think that there is true fear of stepping out, stepping out of the circle and saying, I will not follow this practice. I want to bring in X, Y, and Z. There's absolutely no reason why, for example, colleges don't go out and heavily recruit groups that they don't see in their classrooms.
mm,
Medicine, for example, here at Dalhousie has a huge initiative right now where they are going to schools and communities trying to recruit students from Black and Brown communities.
right.
It's that kind of work that needs to happen. It needs to be deliberate. It needs to be built in policy so that when administration changes, they don't get thrown out, or the practice and policy doesn't get thrown out.
Yeah, there are some people that think that we're not able to fix the existing systems, and they have to be torn down and built up again.
Mhm.
You know, what do you guys think of that? Because it seems that is at the root of the fear of change as well, right? What do you guys think of that, Jay?
Well, I mean, just for the simple fact that everything surrounding these issues are all sort of ingrained in law, which I think paints the picture of people thinking that it can't change. And, you know, we just get so sucked into this way of life that we think it's the only way. And then, you know, the way sort of slavery came about, the way Black people of color are often treated, it's just a constant thing. And for me, that's what seems to sort of darken the whole thing, why change can't happen, is because even though, you know, here, especially in Canada, even though, you know, racism is kind of, you know, covered up a little bit, it still exists. And, you know, and just going back to what you were saying about race, like, we created these differences and therefore it just leaks into everything else. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough because where do we go from here? Like Mom was saying, the hard work has to be done.
Mhm.
And it is hard work, and we need champions to do it. Like, we need people that are at the forefront and at the top of these organizations to actually do meaningful change. And are they really willing to put in meaningful change?
Yeah.
You know, I have to question that. My own organization that I work for, you know, since the summer of 2020, there's been a lot of you know, superficial changes.
Mhm.
I hate to say it, but it's very superficial. I haven't seen a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
But they're saying the right words. They're, the right committees are being formed.
Yeah.
But is that real change? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it to me. It really doesn't.
It's an interesting thing. I've worked both in private and public sector. When I worked in government, it's such a huge entity that it is very often difficult to find the person who really should champion the cause of equity. It got easier. It got easier to the point where at least two of the ministers responsible for human resources actually participated in the equity workshops that I and others were providing. It absolutely is necessary that you have commitment, true commitment from the leaders of the organization, but you also need commitment from people throughout. So champions are not just the highest paid. I often say to people now that the very best policies are torn apart and thrown out by everyday workers in the organization. You don't have to be a leader to destroy any plan of equity. It can happen at all levels. So, the last full-time job I held was with the former Halifax Regional School Board.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, it was probably among the most positive experiences I had for one reason. And that is because the leader of the organization was absolutely committed to equity.
Right.
She showed that by participating in the workshops with me.
Yeah.
That's leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking leadership, relating how she felt about equity at every opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So, what changes did it bring? It meant that there were equity hires. It meant that there was a renewed anti-discrimination policy for employees and students. And to follow that up, there was a designated position to help people dismantle arguments that would come up. So that's actually how I started with the whole mediation arm of my career. So it's that kind of commitment that is rare. I can tell you that is rare.
Yeah.
And I've worked in this area since before the 70s.
Yeah.
And always people they'll say to you, just tell me what to do. And then you tell them what to do and they'll say, well, we can't do that.
Yeah.
What's the next?
What's on the next on the list?
Yeah. So that's how we are where we are now.
Yeah.
There really is a lack of commitment. Sometimes there's a lack of knowledge about what to do. There certainly isn't enough monitoring when these grand policies are crafted and approved by either legislation or whatever. There's nobody to monitor what's going on. So you start with a benchmark. And what does it mean if you have an equity policy? Well, it should mean an increase in Black and Brown and people with disabilities and any other designated group.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do a count. It's that kind of methodic, deliberate practice that brings about equity in an organization. You don't get it just by osmosis.
No.
There's a bill in Ontario that people are concerned about. It's called Bill 67.
Yes.
It's known as the Racial Equity in Education System Act. And the bill aims to ensure that anti-racism and racial equity are key aspects of Ontario's education system from kindergarten through post-secondary education. Do you have any sort of feelings about that as far as Canada's role in CRT?
Interesting, you should say. I feel strongly that we need education from the time we start school. And people say, oh, you can't teach. Oh, you can't teach little kids. Well, yes, you can.
Mm.
Teach them at their level about equity.
Mm-hmm.
People do it all the time.
Yeah.
I have white friends, and I'm sure you guys do too, white able-bodied children who have a sense of what it is not to be treated fairly.
Mm-hmm.
They also have a sense of what it means when they are an advocate for someone who's not being treated fairly.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents have educated them about that level of inequity. It's possible.
Yeah.
So that hopefully, you know, as these people develop, they will know and develop and practice equity. I think it should exist in all schools at all levels. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So is it possible that legislation like that, if applied properly, maybe that will help to kind of cease any type of issues that we see down the States from bleeding up here? Like down the States, where they're in certain states, they're banning books.
Yeah. They're passing laws.
Yeah,
like where it's illegal.
Yeah, they're censoring historical education, all under the guise of CRT. Now, I wonder, will legislation like that try maybe stem the tide of those types of sentiments bleeding up here?
Good question. First of all, I don't think that issues from the States bleed north. I think that it all happens simultaneously.
Good point.
Yes, good point.
I believe, and there are lots of issues that happen in Canada that are very much similar to what's happening in the States. We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
No.
You know, you do hear about it through word of mouth. If you happen to see something on social media. So that's where we get fooled into this false sense of, well, we haven't gone that far yet. Yes, we have. We've had racially visible teens killed in Canada. I would call those hate crimes. We have had people beaten up because of their ethnicity. I would call those hate crimes. I would say that policies are only as good as the monitoring that happens after they're adopted.
Right.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
I believe that policies are a great start, and but I do believe that there are people who can duck and dodge and get around it and under it and over it in order not to practice according to policy. You know, have there been books banned? I wouldn't say that that's something that I've heard of publicly. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are educators somewhere who just don't open them.
Yeah, that's true too. But in the States especially, it's really just a big thing. They're doing, it's, you know, with the population down there, whenever you bring up CRT, they take it as an attack that you're calling them racist or something. And, you know, what are you teaching our white children and stuff like that? It's the fact that America itself, you know, and maybe Canada too, doesn't want to look at their history. And that's just foolish. Just like you said, if the next generation can't be taught, how do we get better? You know?
Yeah, that's true. But I think we do get caught in comparing ourselves to the Americans. Like I do it all the time. And Vanessa, my wife, pulls me up on it a lot.
Yeah.
But And I think Mom's point is correct. I think there are a lot of things that happen simultaneously all over North America.
Yeah.
Mm.
But much like the Jim Crow laws that were codified in the southern states, there was still Jim Crow up here.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of,
Absolutely.
there's not a lot of things that are codified here, but they're actually, it's in practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we might not be banning books, but like Mom said, there might be a reading list with certain equity and diversity type resources there, but there might be certain teachers that just say, okay, I know that's on the list, but
Yeah.
we're going to go in this direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And another issue on education, I know that in this region, there are a number of excellent First Nations educators who have developed curriculum, but it's an elective
Mm-hmm.
for high school.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, therein lies one of the erasers for equity.
Yeah.
You know, if you're trying to educate around history in order not to repeat it, and you have an entire piece or segment of education that people don't have to listen to if they don't want to.
Yeah.
And what does that say?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also just looked at this article as well. It was like critical race theory in Canadian schools. And it says many Canadians believe critical race theory isn't prevalent in Canada. They're convinced critical race theory is just an American issue, but they're wrong. Critical race theory is just as prevalent in Canada as it is in America. Actually, it's probably more acceptable in Canada than it is in America. That's a funny thing about Canada is like everything becomes acceptable. Like it's kind of hidden a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that it should be noted that there are some national and I dare say probably international interest cases that came out of Canada, Nova Scotia, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The Viola Desmond case was one that she was tried, and I've read that case, and there is no mention of racism. They wouldn't. It's not mentioned legally.
Yeah.
She was tried for fraud.
Yeah. 1 cent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's another one, Queen versus RDS, when you're talking about critical race theory. When it first raised its head in Nova Scotia, it was raised by a local judge, Judge Corrine Sparks, who, understanding because of her context as a Black Nova Scotian, she had some awareness about police behavior, negative police behavior toward Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Had she not said that on the bench, that would never have caused any ripple at all in the judiciary or in the justice system, but it rippled across Canada.
Mm.
Because the argument then was, how dare she bring her ethnicity, they use the word race, bring her race into this.
Mm.
You know, when the truth is that we all work on the information that is our ethnicity.
Exactly.
So dominant culture has if you have no knowledge of any other way or mean in our society, then that's your context. My context is different.
Yeah.
So you would think that in a society where we're supposed to be advancing, that all of the information from all contexts would be considered.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think. That's a hard question, actually. That's a hard situation. Like what's the motivation of the dominant culture to embrace that though? Yeah,
I don't know.
that's the thing. You know, unless we hold organizations and government to account, I don't think they have a motivation. So we have to talk about it. We have
Yeah.
to push policy. We have to
Absolutely.
point out the inequalities. We have to do all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, otherwise, I don't. It's unfortunate, but who's going to drive that bus?
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Well,
think.
sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Oh no, it's just the struggle continues. I think it's always sort of going to be that way until something happens and we break through somehow.
Mm,
Well, I look at what's happening here, and I must say I've been out of the loop for a little while
Mm-hmm.
by choice. We have currently an organization here, African Nova Scotian Department of African Nova Scotian Affairs.
yes.
It's a provincial body, and they're now doing public consultations around justice province-wide. So that's another increment. It's been done before, but it's okay that we keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Then, the critical piece is, okay, we're going to take all of the information from these consultations. What are we going to do with it? How do we build change? And then how do we go back 5 years, 10 years from now and measure that change, whatever it is, whatever the recommendations are?
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, like you say, Derek, and Jay, it's business as usual.
Yeah.
We get to a little flurry for a while, and then things settle down.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
out of curiosity, Mom, because you've been doing equity work for quite a long time.
Yeah.
What incremental changes have you seen over the years? Like just even going back to the 90s, when I think that's when you joined the province, wasn't it? Was it the 90s?
Yeah. Early 90s.
Early 90s. Like
actually late 80s is when I joined.
That's right.
Casual.
Yeah.
And I was permanent in the 90s. But changes you tend to see, and I'm pleased to say I do see leaders within government who are non-traditional. They're Black and Brown and Asian and First Nations and people with disabilities. I do see an increase. So, my thing is, are they leading? Are they in leading positions?
Mm-hmm.
We had a former premier, and his name escapes me. That's terribly embarrassing. Anyway, but he was really forceful about equity and publicly forceful about equity.
Mm-hmm.
And he appointed leaders in his organization, in his administration, rather.
Mm-hmm.
That was a first for me. I've never seen it before. In terms of education, I dare say there are a whole lot more teachers now because of the equity work that belong to the so-called designated groups.
Mm-hmm.
Medicine is struggling, he's here, and because I do equity work, you do hear and listen to people saying from time to time the numbers are still not there. Education as a whole has a lot of work to do, from kindergarten right through.
Yeah.
As you see, it was my experience while I was with the school board to understand that, the school system is flooded at the entry level right through to junior high.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Black and Brown folks disappear, and at First Nations
in high school. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although First Nations people generally have increased rates of education these days, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still tons of work to do, still a lot of work to do. But I would say that in most segments, you could see an increase of ethnically diverse people. I would ask the question again, are they leaders in the organization?
Yeah.
That's critical.
Yeah. So Jay, blue sky. Let's do a blue sky
Yeah.
scenario.
All right.
Let's say, we wipe everything clean. How do you tackle systemic racism going forward?
Wow, D.
Like
that is
blue
really
sky.
blue sky. That is
Blue
like
sky.
that blue sky's almost purple. But well, I mean, I would think if you could really scrape it clean, and just going back to what Heather was saying as well, like, people laugh at it because we have designed these ways of making us different, but human race, man, like, let's start there and let's have no divide, right? And there's good opportunities, and if every system does its work to sort of erase their past, then maybe the future will be a little bit brighter for everybody. Especially, and it's not like the kids today don't have access to what's going on. Like, social media does that as well. There is some truth out there, and there's also a lot of other stuff that's not so true, which makes the confusion. So, and that leading into, that's a place to start as well. Is they already know these things. So, once everyone's educated and they know their past, the history can be different in the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Mom?
Well, blue sky. I would call the leaders of all organizations together, and they want to know what to do. That's the first thing they say. I want to know what to do. I would hand them the booklet of what they have to do.
Yeah.
Now, part of that blue sky is not so blue, because if they didn't follow through with the measures, perhaps there would be a bit of a penalty. A blue penalty. But I mean, there has to be some way of advancing the cause. And right now there isn't.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm hopeful that incrementally we will be in a different spot in the next decade.
Yeah.
As you say, there's a lot of hope, I believe. It just needs information and it needs instruction.
Yeah.
Not enough to be hopeful.
Yeah.
I would say education is the key.
Yeah.
I would want not only just about our past and whatnot, but in every corner of everything. Like I think I'm a strong believer that the way that we learn isn't how we're taught. So I think it starts there.
That's very
I think
true.
it starts there. Like this sitting in the classroom and writing lines in books and stuff like that doesn't actually teach anybody anything. I think experiential learning, I think if we do that and we do it inclusively with everyone,
Absolutely.
then that's a step forward.
Yeah.
And if we could do it everywhere, that would be great, because then you'd have, those students going home and teaching, saying, hey, my friend who happens to be black or brown, I want him to come over.
Yeah.
Like we were doing this today, and we went on this field trip, and I really enjoy him, and I want to hang out. And this is what we're missing.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Can I just share one more thing, and you can edit it out if you want?
No.
When I worked with the school board, we had a researcher come in and do a presentation around, we were trying to improve the way education was delivered. And this woman, who is a former educator, said to the management group, she said, if you took any other discipline, medicine, dentistry, law, you name it, carpentry, plumbing, and you took them from the 18th century and plunked them into 2019 or something, 2020, they wouldn't have a clue of what to do with these tools, she said, if you took teachers, educators from the 18th century and plunked them in the classroom, what has changed? Which is sad commentary about how we have changed our thinking around education. So to your point, Derek, I mean, the days of sitting and being quiet and listening are so torturous to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I really do.
Yeah.
And just not to toot our own horns, but and this was a large part of Vanessa, but she really wanted to push that the kids had a different learning experience.
Mhm.
So they did go through the alternative system. It wasn't like too alternative, but there was a lot of experiential learning all the way up into middle school. But then we looked at the high schools, and the high schools, like the experiential learning high schools, they were lacking too much.
Mm.
So there's got to be a middle ground, like
Yeah.
for everyone. But the learning about social justice issues, that all that stuff, I think it's key, and I think it's key when the kids are younger.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This stuff that's gone on in the States about, I don't want to teach my kids about the past. They can't handle it. Like Mom was saying at the beginning there, that's the time that you teach them.
Yeah.
Is when they're younger.
It's like when you think, I know I always go back to America, but where slavery started, there was 11 generations of slavery, and then there was Jim Crow. So, these are the things we have to overcome, and it may not happen in 10 years from now. I hope we have furthered, but it's still going to take a few more. It may take 11 generations for us to get out of it. But Dee, you're right. Education is key.
Well, I was listening to a podcast today, and it was the Daily from New York Times, and part of the reason why there is such a backlash towards equity education in CRT is because the younger generations are so progressive. But the thing is, they're searching out this information themselves, though. They're not getting it out of school.
Right. Yeah.
So they're and their attitudes are more progressive. They don't believe, and we saw that actually when in the summer of 2020, there was a lot of younger people of different ethnicities standing shoulder to shoulder saying this is wrong. This is wrong.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of that education didn't come from the schools, though.
Yeah.
So I think this is what needs to change.
Yeah, it's like everything in these systems, man. Like those are the things that, from education to justice to everything, like that's where the problem lies, man. And hopefully these kids that are standing together with different people of ethnicities, hopefully blue sky, they come together,
blue sky,
and do their thing,
Well, you got a blue sky. You have to do that.
Yeah. Mom, do you have anything to add before we wrap up?
No, just except one thing to say, just kudos to you guys for continuing the conversations, for doing these programs in such a thoughtful way, for having, a diverse group of guests that you've had. I've enjoyed every single one. It's just fantastic. So
thank you. That's much appreciated, Mom.
Thank you. That means a lot,
It does means a lot.
You're Derek's mom, but you were also one of my role models too, so it's amazing to hear those words from you. Honored. Yeah.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau.
Awesome, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's gonna be party time.
I can't wait. Yeah, maybe we'll go away for the weekend, and you guys can have the house.
Oh, hey, that's just like old times.
Yeah, except this time I could take digital pictures of where everything needs to be instead of drawing pictures.
Yeah. Derek was making blueprints. The side table goes there.
Oh man, you guys.
shine so fine to see what you find. Revolution starts with the evolution of the mind.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
Breaking new ground.
Breaking new